Good day. Welcome to our podcast series in a nutshell. Today our topic is green LNG. What is it? How can it help LNG players reduce carbon emissions? My name is Karel Beckman. I'm editor at Natural Gas World, and I'm speaking today with Stephen Miles, who's a fellow with the Baker Institute Center for Energy Studies at Rice University and senior counsel with Baker Botts, and with Matthew Fusina, who is a special counsel at Baker Botts. Until recently, natural gas was generally seen as a climate-friendly bridge fuel in the transition to a low-carbon economy. And to be sure, that's still the case, according to many experts. The International Energy Agency and other experts have noted that it's impossible to meet established climate goals by 2050 without natural gas. Nevertheless, there is increasing pressure from investors and policymakers on players in the natural gas sector to reduce their carbon emissions. So how can they do that? In particular, how can players in the LNG industry respond to this challenge? Well, what they can do is to make their LNG green or greener. How and what exactly does that mean? I will be discussing this question with my guests today, Stephen Miles and Matthew Fusina. So last year, Stephen, you gave a presentation at an LNG conference and you wrote an article on the Forbes website, which for the first time gave an overview of the nascent market of so-called green LNG. And this addressed the issues that need to be resolved to further develop this market. But so before we turn to this analysis, though, let's first introduce you. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about yourself and explain what the Baker Institute for Public Policy is, and indeed what Baker Botts is. Are the two Bakers related, I was wondering, or is that just a coincidence? Stephen.
Karel, first of all, thank you for including us, and thank you to Natural Gas World and your audience for giving us this opportunity to share some thoughts with you on the energy transition, particularly involving green LNG. This has been a subject that's come up in fairly short order the last 2 or 3 years. Certainly how to make energy transition work, the role of natural gas, that's been an ongoing discussion, and you pointed out some of the key points, natural gas and liquefied natural gas, which is just a way of transporting natural gas in a liquid state, have been playing a key role in that in terms of reducing the amount of what would otherwise be coal-fired power generation in much of the rest of the world, particularly Asia. But demands are much greater now, and so this has been an area of interest of mine. I, as you indicated, I wear 2 hats. I'm a fellow at the Baker Institute, the Center for Energy Studies at Rice University, and also senior counsel at Baker Botts. Are they related? In a very, very distant way, yes. They both have a Baker in the family name. Baker Institute was founded in 1993 by James A. Baker III, former Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, and Chief of Staff to the President. His great grandfather, I think I have that right, is the Baker in Baker Botts, going back to the mid-19th century. So that's the relationship. The Baker Institute was founded for the purpose of creating informed, fact-driven policy analysis for all players and participants. In the energy space in particular, we do a lot of work focusing on international and U.S. Public policy. And I'm proud to note that for the last 3 years, in a ranking of 8,000 institutions worldwide, public and private, the Baker Institute was ranked the #1 energy think tank of all universities worldwide. So we're very, very proud of that. I'll let Matt introduce himself and talk a little bit about Baker Botts.
Okay.
Thank you, Stephen. And Karel, I echo Stephen's comments about thank you for really inviting us here today. As you noted in introduction, I'm a special counsel here at Baker Botts, and Baker Botts is really a global law firm. We have some 700 attorneys across 14 different offices scattered throughout the world, but mainly at centers where a lot of them where energy is a focus. With respect to our natural gas and LNG bona fides, we have represented over 100 LNG projects worldwide and been involved with them. And really recently, we've kind of been on the forefront of advising and creating kind of contractual solutions and structures for how the energy transition is really going to work with LNG and how reduced carbon content cargoes are going to be delivered. On my end, I've been working at Baker Botts for a decade now, really focused on LNG and LNG projects. I've focused my attention on projects out of the Gulf Coast, as well as the West Coast of North America. And another part of my practice has been focused on LNG to power projects as well.
Okay.
So that's my introduction, and I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah. So how's it going in the LNG market at this moment? How are things? How's business?
Business is good. Of course, as you know, 2020 was undoubtedly a challenging year. I think that was just kind of a trend in the energy markets generally. But we are certainly seeing a rebound in the LNG space and the natural gas space. And I think there's just kind of a lot of kind of unbridled demand that is kind of waiting to kind of be reintroduced to the market. And a lot of the players are really getting back involved. So we're seeing a lot of action.
Okay. So, Steven, to turn to you. I mean, you gave this presentation last year. You wrote an article for Forbes on GreenLNG, and that's why a reason for us to call you and to talk to you about this. Did you get a lot of response to that?
We did.
Yeah.
We got a lot of response to it, and in a very positive way. I'm excited at the interest. When I proposed the abstract for that speech at Gas Tech for September 2020, some people have said to me, "What is this? We don't understand what it is you're proposing. Why is that?" And then by the time we actually got the whole session together in September and the panel, it seems like it was the topic du jour. And now it's kind of hard to go a day or two without there being some new announcement in the world where somebody is saying, "Hey, we're trying to," sometimes I say green LNG, sometimes I say have reduced carbon LNG, carbon neutral LNG. There are a variety of terms. We'll talk about that together here in a couple moments. So it's an area that is, I would say, it's accelerating, but in doing so, it's kind of spinning in different directions. So early efforts thus far have been sporadic, uncoordinated, and divergent. And so the purpose of the article really was to try to at least, if not pull them all back together, that may be a bit too ambitious, at least to explain what those divergences are and what's going on in the market and the different approaches players are taking.
Okay. So would you say, because I was intrigued by one point you raised in your presentation, you said renewable energy is now competing with natural gas. Would you say that this has been a change a little bit, that until recently renewables were seen as complementary, really, and now there's more of a competition or a feeling of that?
Well, I'll turn it over to Matt in a second because I know he has some thoughts on this, but I will just say that both are true. That there has been competition. There's more competition because the price of renewables is steadily going down. But we have challenges in terms of firming up wind and firming up solar. You can take different views on exactly what happened in Texas a month ago, but it's clear that grid reliability was a critical element, and that gas needs to play an essential role in providing integrity to the grid. And so there is competition. There is also the necessity of collaboration, at least until such time as we truly have an industrial scale battery, which we don't. Matt, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just really to echo Stephen, I think this idea of renewable competition is really something that, while it may have accelerated recently, it's something that's not necessarily new. We've really been seeing, well before this year, 2020 or whatnot, kind of really renewables challenging natural gas, especially in some places where there have been open tenders for power or whatnot. And I think the natural gas industry is acutely aware of this competition right here. And I mean, I'm sure as your listeners are aware, this really has been kind of turbocharged in places by legislative fiat, where kind of the legislator has kind of synthetically boosted demand for renewables and really increased their competitiveness in many places. Now, of course, if you kind of look at this where it's going in the future, you kind of see natural gas continuing to expand and grow. However, it's also looking like many companies in many countries releasing their kind of renewable portfolio standards are really going to increase the long-term installed capacity of renewables at a more accelerated rate. So I think in the long run, this competition is definitely here to stay.
Right. And there may be differences across geographies as well, right? In Europe, for example, things may be very different from, say, Asia or North America. So,
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I think this is kind of an important point, is that really this is going to be looked at on a geographic, region by region basis. And it's really going to say a lot about the product of this kind of low carbon LNG as it really kind of resolves itself, potentially either on a global scale or on a regional scale, really depending upon how this all shakes out. And that's really what the market is kind of determining right now. And I think what this kind of means for the LNG and natural gas industry is that there really is some potential here that the market kind of fragmented into some really regional states, which is, as we know, very different than what the LNG industry is today, and which really is a liquid global commodity. So the question is, if that ever were to occur, is this kind of, in a sense, a step backwards for the natural gas industry, or is it really just the next evolution of the market? I think that's kind of to be determined.
Well, that's an intriguing question, maybe a topic for another podcast.
Certainly.
Before we turn to sort of the green LNG, I mean, Stephen, can you tell me something about the pressure that's currently coming from investors and policymakers? I mean, we read these announcements sometimes, big investment sort of conglomerates, and saying that they will reduce their investments in fossil fuels. What's going on here?
Well, you've really hit the nail on the head. There's a wide range of goals here. I think there's a general consensus that, among players, participants throughout the industry, that they want to do something to help the climate situation, but there's a range of different goals. So for some parties out there, they look at lower carbon or green LNG as sort of a way to get a good citizenship merit badge in terms of public relations fund. For others, it's a matter of regulatory compliance. They need to comply with whether it's EU regulations or California regulations, and they need to have a certain amount of carbon offset and reductions. For others, they're looking at ESG, which is an acronym for environmental, sometimes social, sometimes sustainability, depending on your use of the term, and governance, ESG. And you're exactly right. Large investor groups and smaller ones have said, hey, we want to invest only or primarily in companies and projects that are going to have a green component to them. They're going to be good for the environment, for the climate. An example of that is the Principles for Responsible Investment, which has 3,100 signatories and $110 trillion in assets owned by those signatories. And so they're looking to invest in ESG relevant, ESG qualified companies. And then lenders, a group called the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, has 70 members with $90 trillion in assets. And they likewise have said, we want to provide finance primarily to companies that are doing the right thing in terms of climate and energy. So there's tremendous pressure, but there are different goals. So some companies are really looking to green themselves up so that they can access capital. And then yet others are looking to get a leg up in the market competition and selling against other LNG companies or natural gas companies, maybe even charging a green premium if they could get away with it. So in the market. So there are different goals, and as we're going to talk about in a few minutes, that smattering or splattering of goals gives us one of our challenges here in terms of going forward, because not everybody is looking to obtain the same benefit.
Right. So different goals and different methods. That makes for transparency or a lack of transparency, perhaps, or at least a lot of complexity. So let's look at some of the methods then that can be used to make LNG green or greener. There is bio LNG. There is CCS, of course, carbon capture and storage, and there's the possibility of offsets. And if I'm missing any methods, I'm sure you will let me know. Maybe we can talk about the bio LNG first. You didn't pay not a lot of attention to this in your presentation. What do you think of the potential of bio LNG? How large or limited is it?
So you're exactly right, Karel. There are a number of ways in which one can reduce carbon, and I guess just sort of to provide an overview, some of the ways of reducing carbon in natural gas would include reducing, capturing methane emissions upstream, reducing your flaring, putting more efficient technology in your liquefaction of natural gas technology, using renewable energy to power compressors or power electrification equipment, to power your liquefaction equipment. So there are a number of different steps that one can take, and then there are ways of making, but none of those change the molecular composition of the natural gas, which is about 75% of the carbon associated with the molecules. And so bio LNG is one way of addressing that. You take it comes primarily from two sources, either from animal waste or from landfills, and this is methane that's naturally producing. If you didn't capture it, it would escape into the atmosphere. And so when you capture it, even though it has methane associated with it, it's deemed to be neutral because it would otherwise be in the atmosphere anyway. So the challenge, as you've noted, is it's and we wrote a later paper that addressed this, by the way, in some more detail. But the challenge is it's relatively small and it's isolated, it's local. So most of this methane goes by direct pipe to nearby power plants on a dedicated basis, or sometimes to run tractors as biodiesel, things of that sort, some industrial uses. There was a recent announcement just several days ago about a SPAC, a Special Purpose Acquisition Corporation, that listed on one of the American stock exchanges, that was going to purchase for $1 billion some biomethane producing companies. And what was interesting about that, in addition to the size, that's increasing the scope, is they announced that they had sales agreements for this biogas with the University of California Collegiate University of California system, which is probably dozens of colleges. And you're thinking, well, how they can do that? Are they going to build pipelines to dozens of colleges? No, almost certainly not. I mean, they didn't say what they're going to do, but almost certainly not. They're probably going to be virtual sales. So the biogas will be captured. It'll probably be used locally or put into the grid, and there will be a virtual sales agreement, somewhat like, I'm thinking, the virtual power agreements that corporations sign now for wind energy, even though they're not within 500 miles of a wind facility. So I think we'll start to see more of that. But from an LNG perspective, it needs to be a lot bigger and with better pipeline capacity to LNG plants before it's a real factor there.
Right. So valuable, but not certainly not a silver bullet.
It's a step forward.
Yeah. So what about CCS?
Sure, and I'll say, by the way, hydrogen fits into a similar. This isn't as you know, we do a whole podcast on hydrogen, a couple of them.
Yeah.
But there are announcements that have been made about creating hydrogen and then blending that into natural gas in a similar way, up to 20% as a drop-in fuel. Again, that's a way of reducing the overall carbon content in a pipeline of natural gas. CCUS, so this is carbon capture, use, and storage. And so as a general rule, what we're talking about is that an LNG liquefaction facility you would capture carbon, and then you would either there near the site or by dedicated transportation pipeline, and there are CO2 pipelines and companies that are in this business, take that and inject it most likely into an underground cavern or undersea cavern where it will stay hopefully forever. And one gets, one obviously reduces the carbon. It's not just an offset, it's an actual carbon reduction from the product. So we do see projects. There have been a couple in the past that have large projects, one in Europe, Equinor, one in Australia, Gorgon, that have attempted to do this with varying success. It's expensive, but there are investment incentives for this. The United States, so-called 45Q tax benefit. Europe, of course, has strong support for these carbon reduction technologies. And so we're bullish on CCUS. We think this is something that's going to move forward. It's somewhat like LNG in that it faces similar hurdles, big investment, a lot of capital. You need clear regulatory environments. So you have questions about liabilities if it escapes and who's responsible. So it, like LNG and almost everything else in the energy industry, it's big capital, and it's going to do a lot, but it has a ways to come.
Yeah, how big do you think CCS can become? How big a part of the solution?
Matt, do you have a view on that? I mean, it's a time and money trade-off, right? I mean,
that's exactly right. In the near term, I don't know if it's the current near-term solution, but as the CCUS technology continues to develop, I think definitely over the next decade, we're going to see an increasing number of projects, both in the LNG space and, as Stephen mentioned, the hydrogen space, that really incorporate some form of CCUS technology and storage into these projects.
We'll have to see here on this side of the pond. We'll have to see what the Biden infrastructure bill ends up looking like in terms of how much money they want to pour into this. We're very fortunate. We have along the U.S. Gulf Coast and elsewhere a number of very good sites for carbon storage.
Right.
And we'll just have to see how much heft the government wants to put into it.
Right. Okay, so what about offsets?
Sure. So when you consider offsets, kind of one of the other kind of tools in the low carbon LNG toolbox, as Stephen mentioned, you have to consider what you can't really reduce in the kind of the molecular component of the carbon content of that LNG. You need to offset. And so what an offset is, it essentially is a kind of certificate you receive that provides for the offsetting of essentially a metric ton of carbon emissions. And today in the market, there are really two types of offsets. You got your compliance offsets, and you got what are known as voluntary offsets. Now, compliance offsets, these are offsets that are issued by kind of a regulatory authority in a given jurisdiction. For example, whether under the UN or the EU or the state of California, that really gives you the right to offset an amount of carbon associated with that specific regulatory scheme. And oftentimes these offsets are traded on primary and secondary markets. Prices are fairly transparent, and we've seen sometimes very low cost associated with these offsets, whether that's because of the way the market is issued or just because that's kind of where the supply and demand has ended up. Now, on the other side of the ledger, you have what are known as voluntary offsets. And these are really offsets that are issued outside of the compliance regime. And these are a little more black box. Oftentimes, companies will develop what are known as nature-based products. And under these products, they will issue a number of offsets. And really, these offsets are directly associated with these projects. Now, of course, you start thinking about that, there's a lot of issues. For example, how many credits come from those projects? Are they verified or whatnot? And kind of more commonly today, we are starting to see really kind of international carbon offset standards really coming in and overseeing these projects and issuing credits under their specific ledgers and registries to kind of avoid any of these accounting issues that have historically kind of plagued the offset market.
Right, because you were saying about the compliant offsets, some of them are very low priced. I mean, the price differences are huge, aren't they?
That's exactly right. I mean, we have seen difference in not just, shall we say, in cents difference, but kind of almost, $40 or $50 for in some of
All
the
over,
difference
yeah.
in prices of these credits, which is just when you start putting that towards the overall cost of an LNG cargo, the differences are really astronomical. Yeah, so talking about the difference in prices between compliance offsets and voluntary offsets, we are really kind of seeing in the market, oftentimes, there is a big difference in price. Compliance offsets, we've seen, as we mentioned, very low cost sometimes, not always, but kind of depending where the market shakes out. But some of these initial voluntary offset prices we've seen have been substantially and materially much higher in price, to the sense that we have heard offerings on the market up to 20, 30, 40 times the cost of the compliance offsets that could be similarly acquired. That's not to say they could be acquired, because those compliance offsets oftentimes need to be used in a specific market and are not appropriate. But it just shows that there is very much still a divergence in these markets, and this really hasn't yet reached equilibrium.
Right. So that would mean if I looked at this market as an external observer, say, I would find it not quite credible at this moment, given all the different methods that exist and given all the differences in prices. What do you think could be done to improve credibility?
To improve credibility, I think one of the ways that really the credibility is being improved is that many of these companies that are seeking offsets are really doing through these international registries, whether that be kind of the American Carbon Registry, VCS, under the specific UN protocols. And what is important when you acquire offsets through these standards is that these standards are making the claim that they are going to track the amount of carbon content that are coming out of these projects. There are not going to be any issues of additionality or double counting or any other questions that gives serious rise to concerns. And as a result, that you can really trust these offsets. And that's really kind of an important point going forward, because if there's going to be trust within the international market, you're going to really have to look at some forms of standards that are going to properly kind of track these carbon credits really throughout the value chain, from their production until their eventual retirement.
Yeah. Stephen, you said in your presentation and in your paper, I think, that the sector should get together on this.
I do. I will say, I think that in the near to midterm, it's going to be a stretch to come up with a single standard for reduced carbon or carbon neutral LNG cargo. I think it's it's like trying to come up with a unified theory of the universe. I think that it's probably a bit of a bridge too far, and in the near to midterm. And the reason for that is that there are so many different goals that the parties have that aren't the same. As we talked a little bit about earlier, some parties want to capture the benefit of ESG claims. Others want to capture the marketing premium downstream. Others want to qualify for finance, or they want to sell the credits in an open market. And so everybody doesn't have the same goals. And so I think that where we should really focus, and this is important, I think we can really move the ball forward here, focus on sort of the words you mentioned, Karel, earlier: transparency and accountability. And so what we need is clear accounting of the carbon content in each stage of the product life cycle, and to be able to make that public as part of the sale of a product, any commodity, frankly, but we're talking about LNG here, something like the label on a food package, right, where it says what the dietary percentages are. We need to get that information standardized, how to measure that, make it accountable, make it transparent, and then buyers will at least know what they're buying. And if there's a green premium being paid, then it should be related to that product being greener. And Matt has a great statement. He says, we may end up being like a gas station, petrol station, where you can buy economy, regular, or premium. It may end up being like that. The key is information, letting the customers know exactly what's in your cargo of LNG, it's in your natural gas, so they can make their decisions about, okay, how green do I want to go? And I think that's going to be very important. And then they can structure the benefits accordingly.
Yeah. And who should do this according to you?
Well, I think the industry has to do it, but I think the policymakers can help lead. So, so the industry, there was a tender, Matt referred to it earlier, last year by a certain Asian LNG buyer, and they required in their tender, they said, okay, in order to bid, every company has to state what the carbon content of their cargo is going to be when it lands on our shores. You don't have to reduce it. You don't have to offset it. We'd really like it if you do that, but you have to state clearly what it is. We want that label. That's the right direction. Let's start there. I think governments have a great role to play. I think in COP26, you're going to see this. I think this is something that the U.S. administration is going to be very involved in. President Biden issued an executive order in January, his 5th day in office or so, 6th day in office, in which one of the things that he ordered the U.S. government to do was along these lines, which was to promote standards, particularly in the nature-based solutions area, but standards for measuring carbon and measuring carbon offsets and reductions. This is what we need. We need to start with transparency. We need to start with accountability. This will bring integrity. It will also perhaps shame those players who are not doing what they should do, and will give us a market, an industry world in which, we can tell what's real and what perhaps is not so much.
Yeah, I understand also that there's quite a bit of interest from buyers, right? In Asia, buyers in Asia, for example, which I didn't expect so much, but
and Europe.
Yeah, and Europe. Okay, so as a final point, I think we should talk about the costs. So what do you think the additional costs will be, and will this affect the competitiveness of LNG?
Sure. Well, as Matt was explaining, the costs for offsets are all over the map, and with a range, of more than 10x from high to low. And so I think the extent we get more transparency, we get more accountability, that delta will shrink, and you will truly, hopefully, price will become much more closely tied to the amount of green benefits that one is getting. There will be costs in investing in these changes, but the world wants clean energy. There's no doubt about that. And as you mentioned, there's wide acceptance that we're going to need natural gas to get to the end line of where we all want to be. Somebody, a climate scientist, said recently at a speech he gave, he said, if we didn't have natural gas, we'd have to invent it. By which he meant we need it to back up renewable. So this is important. We have an energy poverty issue we're going to have to pay attention to here. And you talk to policymakers from Africa, they're not as excited about higher cost energy for climate. I mean, they're all pro climate, but their point is, we have a dramatically underserved continent, and the more expensive it gets, we won't be able to serve it any sooner. So so that's an issue. We have to keep our eyes on that ball. But
so some final thoughts, right? I mean, what would your message be to the LNG industry at this point? Matthew, maybe I can start with you on this.
Sure. I think we have a couple main points of the LNG industry. First of all, the LNG industry, as it's undertaking the energy transition, this is not something that's really an existential risk for the industry, as I see it unfolding. The LNG industry, it's been faced with issues before, it has overcome them, and this is just another way to really stress LNG's bona fides as really a low carbon solution in the energy toolbox. Already, as you initially noted, Karel, kind of in your opening, LNG has significantly reduce and displace coal. So it already has that going for it. And now if we can further reduce the carbon content of that LNG, as Stephen noted, kind of starting initially with MRV and eventually moving up to a more potentially robust reduction and offsetting regime, that's really significant for the industry. And I think many buyers and countries will really be interested in LNG and continue to be interested in LNG as a real energy solution, not just in the near term, but really in the long term. So I think that's really kind of where the industry sees this playing out.
Okay. Well, just one question on that. I mean, you say it's not an existential risk, but then still, maybe I'm based in Europe, so maybe my perspective is a bit skewed. But it's like, there seems to be also a lot of criticism nowadays of fossil fuels in general, natural gas also included. So, what should their response be?
Karel, I would just add there. So, and fair enough. And I think it's very important and generally a positive thing when societies and populations and voters and then their policymakers push for positive change. So I think that's all a good thing. Look, there are changes that can and should be made in the LNG industry in the short term that would help a lot. Leading up to transparency and accountability, overall. But methane reductions upstream are something that actually has economic benefit. If you're capturing fugitive emissions, that can be done, and quite a few players are doing that right now. That will reduce the carbon footprint of LNG and natural gas. Signing on to either the World Bank's zero routine flaring by 2030 initiative or something comparable that recognizes that flaring should be minimized, if not eliminated, in non-operational, non-emergency situations, routine situations. That would make a big difference. I know both of those are topics in Europe in terms of natural gas and LNG and their role. And I think they'd make a big positive step forward. But as Matt says, ultimately what we need, clear standards, transparency, accountability, and then the market can decide what it wants.
Okay. Well, thank you. I think we'll hear plenty of more about green LNG in the coming years, because it seems to be an important issue also to investors and policymakers. And let's see how the gas industry responds to that. And no doubt you will both be ready to assist them in this task. Thanks for your cooperation and for this conversation.
Thank you, Karel.